Hi Rars, today we're going to be going over my first win over Grandmaster in the World Open, which was just played around a week ago. So let's take a look. First round of the World Open, I played a Grandmaster, Mark Paragua, and I guess if you want to know more about him, I took a look and I found his FIDE profile. Obviously, very good player. 2461, pretty decent. Although if you look at his rating progress, I'm not sure if you can see everything, but back, almost 20 years ago, he was over 2600. And I guess you also want to know how important he is. He has a Wikipedia article. It's actually pretty long. Although if you look at some of the details I put in here, I feel like there must be some dedicated fan of his that keeps putting things. Because look at the description for the U.S. tournaments. It just lists every tournament he plays in. And I mean, I don't think most GMs get articles like this, right? They don't just list every single tournament that they played and how they scored in it. So definitely he has some fans that are updating this. But I mean, Rarmy, you got to be doing this for me too. So this is just a chore for you guys now. Someone tried to put a Wikipedia article up for me before, and unfortunately that got taken down. I mean, Wikipedia didn't understand how famous I was, but that was because there's only one loyal RAR. If we had 10,000 of you guys insisting that I'm super famous, I mean, I don't know how they could argue. They don't even have 10,000 staff, right? So that's what we should have done. But anyhow, let's see how the chess should have gone against this Grandmaster. So, well, actually, it's how it did go. So everything was great this time. This is how everything should be done. So the game started normally. I play what we call the triangle system as black a lot of the time. Pretty low skill setup. And he plays g3, which allows me to take the pawn. And so I'm going to try to be annoying. Right? I'm going to try to hold on to the pawn and hope that he doesn't beat me. And, the next few moves are pretty normal. And we end up reaching this position, which is actually pretty common in the opening. Obviously, white has pressure in the long diagonal. White has better pawns in the center because I decided to go. It's a queen's gambit decline. Of course, the whole point is to gain control of the center. But I do have an extra pawn, right? Now, he could actually win it back if he wanted to, and he probably should have, but he was more aggressive and wanted to play for the win, right? The main move here is to take on b5, because the point is I can't take back with a c pawn, right? And this is a big concession. Black usually wants to take back with a c pawn, so he's a good bishop, but I can't do that here. And then after rook takes a8, bishop takes a8, knight c3. And the point is he's threatening to take in b5 thanks to this discovery or this pin. And I really should just let him do it because any attempts to defend it will not be good for me. For instance, knight d5, e4, and he gets a lot of counterplay, right? Because he has the center. Even though I have an extra pawn, it's not a very good pawn. There would also be queen b6, but that's not really good either because then actually white can go crazy, play b3. And white has very good compensation here, actually. It's still unclear, but what I probably was going to do was just going to let him take back the pawn. In fact, go something like here and let him take back in b5. But the problem is this is pretty equal. I'm not sure if my opponent saw this or not. I think there's a good chance he was aware of it. But this is, pretty boring. Even though he has the bishop pair, I have very solid pawns here. I'll play normal moves. And honestly, he's just not better. So he had to go aggressive. He played knight c3, and he's just going to take over the center. Hope that even though he has no immediate attack, that in the long term his central pawns will prove to be powerful enough. I thought, okay, I guess I'm going to keep my extra pawn now. Now I stop this idea of taking. Although to be fair, I also could have done bishop e7 again and allowed him to do the same thing for one last time. And this whole, this whole tactical thing again. So again, this is an important position to know, but this is just equal for black. So this is why this is a decent opening for me. So anyway, I play queen c8 though, defending my bishop. Now if he takes, of course, I'll take back with the c pawn, and that would be a mistake. Although we could try to play d5 to be sharp, but then it just doesn't work. Bishop b4. And now I'm threatening to take this and take the pawn. And if he plays e4, he's blocking his bishop even more. And so after I castle, black's getting better with knight bd7. And as we can see here, if black can consolidate and keep his extra pawn, white's often not is only down a pawn, but he also has a terrible position. Because where's the attack here? In fact, I'm going to be the one that has the attack with my extra pawn. So white better be careful, otherwise the queenside avalanche is coming for him. He played f4 though, thinking he was going to go for the attack. He's like, I'm going to play e4, then f5, and then I'm going to go crazy. And can anyone else hear my computer is going crazy? I don't know why they're doing that, but whatever. Knight bd7 was played, and now he played e4. So he's just going to try to take over the center. And there's actually been a pretty decent amount of games in the Masters database. In fact, there has been 14 games, and a bunch of them had bishop e7, and 5 of them had bishop e4. But I played the best with bishop e7. But none of the Master game databases featured my opponent's next move, which completely shocked me. He took an f7, a completely ridiculous piece sack. Now, this is just a terrible move. Obviously, he sees my plan of castling. He didn't want to let me do it, but this is completely not objective, and it just, it just doesn't work. So again, I think my opponent probably lost objectivity. He was probably determined to win. He did spend a long time in this move. I should mention that after this move, he was down to only 32 minutes, and we started the game with 90, and we have a 30-second increment. He spent 24 minutes in this move. So I can't believe he calculated everything. He actually didn't calculate everything. There's just too much to look at, and he made a lot of mistakes later on. So I don't know what it was. Did he just feel like after I castled, like he would have nothing, so he thought it was better going for this Desperado? Perhaps that's what it was. But I do think that if he just played normal moves, I mean, just F5. Sure, I'm better. I was going to take. And if he takes back with the rook, the attack's not very good. I just castle, and this knight's really solidly defended. And even though he's an open F-file, it doesn't really do him much good. But still, I mean, sacking a piece is crazy. But hey, what can I say? It was interesting and surprising. And I had a huge time advantage at this point. Of course, I took back. I had over an hour, so I was still up half an hour at this point. He played e5, which I had seen as a follow-up, but I calculated a pretty long line. I thought, okay, knight d5. He plays f5, obviously. I take it. He takes back. And after king e8, in order to let my rook come out, if I go king g8, you know, my king might look safer, but it blocks my rook. He played knight e4. Now, this is actually the wrong move order. My opponent's plan is to put a knight in d6 or c5. More likely d6, right? Because then it really destroys me. The only thing stopping it is his bishop. So what he really should have done here first is play the move bishop g5. And this would have actually been pretty dangerous for me, because he will get rid of my bishop, and then he's going to try to do the same thing. And honestly, this would be sort of dangerous for me. I'm not sure what I would have done, but he's going to be able to get rid of this key bishop, so it would have been very annoying. But knight e4 is the wrong move order, because now I can take advantage of some tactical tries against this rook in f5. I play the move knight c5, thinking if I get rid of this knight, then I will survive, right? I mean, at least I won't lose the game, because if he's got to trade off, and it's going to be hard for him to win with only bishops, because obviously knights are the tricky pieces that can destroy you. He has to take. If he moves his rook back, I'll just take, I suppose. I took back at c5. Now, I could have taken the rook also, but then I saw he would take in b7, and I wasn't sure what my compensation was. Now, actually, it turns out I have great compensation, and I'm still at material after king d7. Pretty surprising, but this just brings in the rooks or something like this. And it turns out I'm the one attacking. But unfortunately, I didn't see this. And after bishop takes c5, he played rook g5. Understandable enough. This pretty much forces me to retreat, after which he plays the move e6. e6 is strong for several reasons. Or not strong, but it makes sense. He might play e7, trying to just open the e-file, threaten to take a g7, just completely blow up the position. But also, it sort of interferes, and maybe has bishop h3 ideas connected to it. And I can't take the pawn, obviously. But I want to take this pawn because it's really annoying. So I played king d8 instead and thought, okay, now I'm going to take this pawn. And here my opponent probably made a pretty big mistake. Now, to be fair, he was already sort of low on time. He was only down to 21 minutes, and he took 10 of them here. So he only had 11 minutes after this move. And I think his frustration was he just realized there was just no way to win this. I mean, my position's sort of solid, and I have a simple plan of walking my king over, taking this pawn, and he's down a piece and a pawn. So he better find something fast. And he managed to make me mess up, so I guess he did something right. He played bishop takes d5, which might look crazy at first, but did have some ideas. Queen h5, and now the idea is in some lines he could take a d5. But now I just took an e6 defending against that threat. He played rook e5, and his plan was this. After queen d7, he's going to try to put something on the 8th rank, and that way he will be able to stop me from developing, right? And at least if he can stop me from developing an extra piece, maybe he has some chances to survive. And so after a takes b5, I was very foolish for falling for this plan. In this position, I really should have just played the move bishop d6. Very simple, attacking this rook, and I just win the game. Because once this rook goes back, if the rook decides to go back, which would be not a very smart idea, I take back, and now there's just nothing. I'm really just up a full piece. We trade off these rooks. There's literally nothing. I guess you can give one last check. I'm up a full bishop. Well, actually, I'm up a bishop and a pawn. I mean, it just has no compensation. There's just no attack here. I just win. So that was really careless by me. Instead, I took back, allowing him to execute his idea, which was to put a rook on the on the 8th rank. And now that pins the bishop, and that's sort of annoying. First, it also attacks the rook, so bishop, so I have to get out. And I was realizing here, okay, I made my life definitely way harder here. Because even though I'm up a full piece in the pawn, I got to worry about this rook. It's all pinned. If I can't get my pieces out, maybe he'll find some way to annoy me, right? I wasn't sure if he had any attack. I do have some defenders, and honestly, he probably doesn't. But if I can't get my pieces out, what am I going to do? So I decided it was time to play crazy, and I realized I should just try to get developed anyways. So I played g5. Hanging my rook, but his rook's also attacked, and his bishop's also attacked. So I realized at the end of the day, it still works out for me. He played queen f6 check, trying to get his, trying to attack this bishop also. Although, again, his bishop's also attacked. And here we probably both missed a lot of complicated moves. I played king a5, not realizing that if he took an f8, after rook takes f8, queen takes f8, he has the threat of a perpetual check if I take his bishop. Although to be fair, maybe he wouldn't have gone for it. He still probably wanted to win, so probably this would have made him mad. But that means after this, in this position, I would have had to play the move b4. And it turns out I'm still winning with my extra pawn. But only because I have such a good, I have a safe king, it turns out, in the end. Maybe I can even march this thing up the board. And surprisingly enough, yeah, I have the better passed pawn, or I will get one, and I'll win this position. But this probably was my opponent's best way to go. Instead, he played bishop d2 check, allowing me to unleash something really mean. I played c3, attacking his bishop. And the point is, even though I give up a pawn, I'm still attacking his bishop at the end of the day in every single line, leaving him really losing. And yeah, he really realized he couldn't do much about this, so he played rook d8 trying to trick me. And again, I sort of fell for the trick, honestly. I played bishop e7, which is way too careless. Queen g7 was the way to win here. It's very simple. I simply attack his queen. I'm attacking the bishop. He just can't defend. I think he was going to try bishop takes b4 here, perhaps, but the checks really don't work for him. Although I would have to calculate this to be careful. King c4, and apparently, yep, I just run away, and everything is great. Although this can be a little bit scary, but at some point my king will be the one attacking, right? So that should have been how I played it. Bishop e7 was more simple because I was too scared, but it does still simplify into a really good position. After king takes b4, queen b6, queen b5, all of this was forced, and eventually I end up being up 2 bishops for the rook. And so I knew, okay, this is pretty good for me. And when I win this pawn, it will just be a full 2 bishops for a rook. But now he has drawing chances, right? Because once we reach this endgame, my problem is he's going to try to use his h-pawn to get me to sacrifice one of my bishops, or even just distract my bishops. Then if he can do that, if he can get me to sack a bishop for a pawn, he'll sack his rook for this one, and then he'll draw the game. And it turns out the game is actually drawn with perfect play. But still, I have more chances here, because obviously I have the 2 bishops. What I'm going to try to do is use them to use checks to either block his king or also stop this rook from getting behind my pawn successfully. And my opponent does need to be careful. For instance, if he plays the simple rook d7 right now, this would just lose. I could play king c6, and this is one of my ideas. I'm not letting Bit get behind the pawn. And he realized this is sort of annoying, right? Basically, then that's why he played king f2. He saw, okay, if my opponent did nothing, like he played this move, then I push the pawn, and he can never get behind it because the king c6 again, right? This time, the bishops are overpowered, and after rook d8, bishop f6, again, he cannot hold control of the pawn, and I'm just going to play d2 and queen. So as we see here, he is under a lot of pressure. The way for him to draw this, though, would be to try to get his king in front. Now, I was expecting this, and I thought I would still be winning this position, because I thought I'd play d3, and I'd go bishop c3, and I thought this was actually pretty good for me. He might go king d1, and my plan was to do this, but it turns out I'm probably not in time after the only move, rook c7. If he plays any other move, then my plan would work. Because then what I would do is here I had bishop c8 to check his king, and he can't really defend this because my bishop's defending g7. So he'd have to be really precise here. But if he was precise, he would have managed to find a way to draw. And rook d7, which is trying to stop this move, again fails to king c6. So that would have been the only way for my opponent to draw. Unfortunately for him, he chose the wrong square for his king. And this ends up costing him. Because now after d3, he doesn't have another tempo to force his pawn, and he has to keep wasting time defending my pawn, right? I can always defend this thing. I just would make sure he doesn't advance his own pawn. And keep in mind, at this point, we're also really both down to, we're really low on time. Even though we just got the time control, I'm only down to 7 minutes here because I've been using all my time trying not to mess it up. And luckily I didn't. He tried to attack this, so I just defended. And now I've figured how I was going to win the position. If he does nothing, I'm going to play bishop c1, and the pawn simply just queens. So he has to stop that. Played rook c7. And here I decided to be fancy and mean. I played the move bishop d4 check. The point is, if he takes, I play d2 and I just queen. Obviously, he's a grandmaster, he won't fall for it. But now when he plays king d2, I play bishop e5, threatening to check his king. Again, he's trying to blockade me in the d2 square, so I just have to remove the blockade. If I can make a check on c3 or f4, I'll force his king to move, and then I'll be able to move my d pawn eventually. So he had to stop bishop f4. I checked him. He played king e3. And at the moment, this was probably the strangest last blunder, because this made the win really easy for me. I just played the move king b3, putting my king on c2 is the plan, and I just queened the pawn. He probably should have gone back, but to be fair, I saw that this was winning for me too after a bunch of moves. Probably the simplest is, again, bishop c8, threatening bishop g4. And again, the funny thing is he never can stop it because my bishop defends here. So again, very effective piece. And if he goes rook f4, he's just asking me to activate myself. And I mean, I guess he can try h6 here, but that's just not going to work. I'll find a new diagonal to attack him on, and probably the simplest is bishop d7, followed by moving the king and bishop a4. Again, he can't even promote. It looks scary, but it just doesn't work. Um, Although here, again, I guess I still have to be super brilliant and play bishop e6 to try to get over here. So again, lots of brilliancies here and lots of confusion. But the point is, eventually, I will end up winning by finding a way to check his king successfully. Also here, this is probably easier. And this is sort of my main idea. I'm going to get the bishops here, force his king away, or even checkmate it, and then queen the pawn. King e3 made that easier, though, because after king b3, I'm going to put a king in c2, and then you'll never stop it. So we had to stop the king from getting to c2. And obviously, I cannot play d2 now, because he would just take it. But I just have to reroute the bishops. I play bishop g7, threatening bishop h6 check. And if I play that, his king won't be able to defend, then I really will just win. And also notice, I'm completely winning now because his pawn is no longer a threat. I've completely blockaded his pawn, and he's never going to be able to blockade mine with two bishops. So the win's pretty simple at this point. I checked him, and now I thought, okay, now I got to remove the blockade at d1. I played bishop b5, threatening to either go to a4 eventually, by moving my king and then queen the pawn, or I'll find a new diagonal. He tried to sort of stop this one plan I had of going, to g4. I played king c3 though, and after king e1, which wasn't, I don't know what that move did. He just had nothing to do, I guess. He resigned after bishop d7. Now I didn't need to play this move. I could have just played d2 immediately. Apparently, I was just so nervous though that I just forgot about this for some reason. Very strange. But either way, he knew it was just game over. I'm going to play d2 check next. Then wherever his rook goes, I'll just check him, and then I'll queen the pawn. He'll have to give up his rook for my d pawn, after which I have two bishops, and obviously two bishops is a very easy win. So he did not make me prove that I could win that position. So anyhow, that was my first win against a Grandmaster. It was completely shocking, obviously, and I didn't play another one for the rest of the tournament, although I still had a good event. Yeah, I didn't play any more evil GMs, but, what can you say? That was a pretty solid victory, and yeah, this just should let the world know that no one can stop Joseph Truelson, and I am going to take over everything. So, don't you dare even try to stop me.